Welcome back to Boom and Bust, here with our guest, the Honourable Peter Bethlenfalvy. He is Ontario's Minister of Finance. Peter, again, just sort of delving a little bit deeper in some of the brushstrokes that you've given to us on your latest budget. As you mentioned, it is a budgetary deficit. I think it projects a $9.8 billion deficit for this year, which was a little bit surprising for some commentators. But you've mentioned because of decline in revenues, that was the situation. So you said you got a path to getting back to balance. Maybe go into that a little bit for our audience as well.
Sure. These deficits, with the revenues being down, they will rebound. And by the way, I think you should rename your show, at least for today, Boom and Boom, because, our budget is a boom, boom budget. We're looking to do things that we haven't seen in a long time. And that is think down the road a little bit and make sure you've got the infrastructure. Make sure, you build these hospitals. If you're not building hospitals, if you're not building subways, you're not thinking down the road. So I think this is a boom and boom budget. I'll call it the boom boom budget.
Fair enough.
And I think, as I said earlier, it's really important to think about if you're going to borrow money, I prefer to do it for long-term investments, real assets, than for deficits. So we have a path to balance that we'll have a deficit this year, as you mentioned, by the way. To Quebec at $11 billion deficit. They're half the size of us. So we had a smaller deficit than them. Our economy is twice the size. In fact, we are the lowest deficit to GDP than BC, Quebec, or Ottawa. So we're on the right track. Our borrowing costs, by the way, are the lowest they've been relative to revenues since the 1980s. So, Tony, you would remember the 90s when 33 cents on the dollar went to the taxpayer dollar, went to bondholders.
I remember.
We're at 6.7 cents. So we're trying to minimize that. So we've got a prudent, responsible budget that focuses on fiscal responsibility while at the same time focused on economic prosperity. And I think you can do both at the same time.
Now, one of the things that's on the minds of Ontarians, of course, is housing and the cost of housing. How does your budget help get new homes built in Ontario?
Well, two ways. I'll talk first about the Ontario way, and then I'll talk about the Canada way. So in Ontario, we've been, I think, ahead of the curve. We've been, I think we're up to our fifth bill on accelerated housing in Ontario. So we recognized very early that housing supply, through lack of investment over the previous decade or two, meant that the supply wasn't there for the growing demand. If you're going to let a lot of people into this country, where the federal government has the immigration levers, then you got to have the housing and you got to have the infrastructure. And by the way, I support that, but the responsibilities on infrastructure. So where we've leaned in this budget and previous budget documents is enabling infrastructure for housing, meaning the water, the sewage, the kind of infrastructure that people don't talk about. That's absolutely necessary to get houses built. And by the way, this was Ontario municipalities' number one ask, is support us on housing enabling infrastructure. And by the way, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, same thing. So I worked with the other finance ministers. So that's the first thing, Ontario. Right. But let me talk about the federal government. I worked with the other federal the provincial ministers of finance and said, hey, this is our challenge. And they said, that's our challenge. So we had a federal provincial territories meeting back in December. We made it the number one issue. I led the charge with Ottawa. And sure enough, and the Minister of Finance of Canada, Chrystia Freeland's budget, they've got housing infrastructure as a big budgetary item, which will help get housing built. Now, they have conditions. We don't want conditions. Municipalities know how to spend that money. But I think in the main, very positive bill housing in this country, in this province, which is absolutely critical. I mean, there's a whole generation, the millennials and the Z or Z demographics. I mean, the dream of home ownership is gone. So we have an obligation, municipally, provincially, federally, to get the job done to build that housing supply.
So you're definitely working with the federal government. You've got a plan to work with them to alleviate the shortage then?
Well, like the carbon tax, we don't agree on anything,
right?
But on some things, we can work together. Now, this housing money is good, but we can't have the conditions because that's just bureaucracy, that's red tape. And the province and the municipalities know where the infrastructure needs are. So I'm an optimist. I'm sure we can work together to kind of get things done for the people of Ontario.
We're having our conversation with the Honourable Peter Bethlenfalvy. He is Ontario's Minister of Finance. Obviously, a lot to go. We've still got half a show to go here, so please stay with us. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back with our guest, the Honourable Peter Bethlenfalvy. He is Ontario's Minister of Finance. Peter, you talked a lot in the first couple segments about the emphasis on infrastructure investment in this year's budget. What specific projects do you see as really important to the future economic vitality of the province?
Well, I think, we have to focus on economic prosperity, and what that means, what provincial governments can do is, think about if you have 1 million population growth in the last 2 years that we've had, and that's going to continue. Where are they going to go to school? Yeah. We have to build the schools. So we've got a $16 billion plan to build schools in Ontario. How are they going to survive to get the kids to school? Many places you can't take public transit. Ontario, and again, is a massive geography. So, making sure that we got the Highway 413. So we've really leaned into that. And after fighting the feds for a couple of years, they finally relented, saw the light, and now they're working with us to get the Highway 413 built, which is going to help move people and goods in part of the province. Building the subways. We've got 4 subway lines drilling, subway tunnels right now as we speak. That's unprecedented. And you know what? That's going to allow to take cars off the road and actually free up gridlock so we can move even more people. That's good for the environment. So things like that we just have to continue to do on the infrastructure side. With a growing and aging population, Tony, you have to have the healthcare system in place, not just hospitals and long-term care homes, but also home and community care. Putting in the infrastructure to make sure that we can take care of people and we can take care of them where they want and need to be taken care of, and often that's at home. So it's a bit of a transformation on the infrastructure side. It's unprecedented, I think, in the history of Ontario, maybe even Canada. And in North America, we've got more cranes on the skylines in Ontario, right across the province than we've ever had. So we're leaning into making sure we rebuild the economy and making sure we make the investments that take time to get done, but a relentless approach to getting it done.
I'm glad you mentioned healthcare, of course, because that's top of mind for Ontario residents as well. You mentioned some of the infrastructure spending there. In terms of operating money as well, was that a focus of your budget?
Absolutely. So let's take healthcare, for example. I'm glad you mentioned that. We really leaned in on investing in primary care, so right. More family doctors, and we've done that in many different ways, but what we call professional teams in the communities, so that you get more care locally in the community. We invested, and that will onboard another 600,000 patients in the province. We put more money into home and community care so that the resources, the people, the PSWs, personal support workers, and nurses are encouraged to take that vocation and take care of our citizens at home if they choose to be taken care at home. We put money into in healthcare, for example, digitizing. There's so much to do and so many opportunities to make things more efficient in our healthcare system. So, for example, we're using artificial intelligence to take clinical notes from a meeting with your specialist or your physician. It's already being done in some hospitals. So effective, so efficient, accurate. So it's just not one thing in our healthcare system as we transform it. It's multiple things, and we're going to continue that. That's a journey.
That's interesting. I've always said that AI, there's always a lot of concern about AI in this or that field, but in healthcare, it's really part of the solution, isn't it?
It's really, really revolutionary in a way. And sure, we have to make sure we safeguard against the other elements of AI that can be not as good, but there's so much more positive. And let me give you another example how AI can mine data. We have so much data that using, obviously confidentially, privacy issues, security issues, all taken care of, but allows you to say the predictive analytics of what the chances are you might get bladder cancer, for example. What are the symptoms? Because we got decades worth of of data and being more preventative. It's a powerful tool. So let's embrace the best parts of it. And I think that's something that our government has embraced. In fact, I've been the champion of that since day one.
And so you see an expansion of that into the future?
Every budget, we're all, because using data, using artificial intelligence is a means to get better outcomes for patients, for citizens, for while safeguarding privacy and cybersecurity. But you can't just put your head in the sand and just hope it goes away. We got to embrace it. And I absolutely see that on so many levels. We see it in the private sector, and we see it now being used in Ontario in the public sector to get better outcomes for people on more efficient. And in fact, it's more value for the taxpayer. So it's a win-win-win.
We're going to continue with our guest, the Honorable Peter Bethlenfalvy, after these messages. Please stay with us. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having a great conversation with the Honorable Peter Bethlenfalvy. He is, of course, the Ontario Minister of Finance. Peter, one investment item that certainly has captured the news these days is the investments Ontario has made in electric vehicle assembly plants and battery plants and so on. How confident are you that these will pay off for the taxpayers in the future?
Well, I think first off, you have to look at it's a historic opportunity. It's a once in a generation or maybe 50-year opportunity. Prime Minister Bethlenfalvy, signed the Auto Pact, and I think it was very wise all those years ago. And we've got, because we've created an industry here in Ontario, we've got over 100,000 jobs that are in the auto manufacturing sector.
Right.
And then when an opportunity comes up to pivot to the future, where the puck is going, which is electric vehicles, you have a couple of choices. You could put your head in the sand and let it go away, or you can embrace it. We've chosen the latter. I think there's no question that this industry, billions around the planet, hundreds of billions have been invested. And so it's going to happen. The question is, what role do you want Ontario to play in that? We looked at it and said, look, we've got over 100,000 workers with the experience, the talent, auto workers, advanced manufacturing here in Ontario. We have the opportunity to grow that dramatically by pivoting to electric vehicle production, battery assembly. We also looked at, what's really important for capital is a clean energy grid. And guess what? Ontario has one of the cleanest energy grids in the world, because it's fired by nuclear, hydro, and renewables. So we got an advantage there. Then we look at it geopolitically and we say, the critical minerals, you can go to China and parts of Africa to get those critical minerals, or you can go to Northern Ontario and bring prosperity to the north. So we have the opportunity, the natural resources. We've got the know-how with the talent and the skills of our auto workers in Ontario. We've got a great ecosystem. We're next door to the largest economy in the world. So I believe that this will pay dividends, not just for those direct jobs that are being created, really literally tens of thousands, but the indirect jobs. The economists say for every direct auto manufacturing job, there's 7 more created in the supply chain. And by the way, these are great jobs, they're sustainable jobs, and they're good paychecks. So I think it's the right direction, and I'm very proud of what we've done to invest in the sector.
We've got time for one more substantive question. Obviously, you mentioned the carbon tax, which is a federal initiative, obviously, and it does weigh on Ontario families, and Premier Ford has come out swinging on that, of course. But we saw in the latest federal budget as well this hike in the inclusion rate for capital gains. Any thoughts about that? Are you hearing from your constituents about that one as well?
Well, I hear from a lot of people, whether it's the carbon tax or any sort of tax, we'd rather put money back into people's pockets. We'd rather allow businesses to make the decisions on lower tax rates. So that's our preference. Tony, our government has never raised a tax, never raised a fee, never raised a toll. In fact, just the opposite. We've cut taxes, cut fees, cut tolls. We're saving businesses over $8 billion a year in costs, which is giving companies a better competitive advantage to invest capital here in Ontario. We're saving people last year $8 billion because of cutting the gas tax and lower taking away the drivers' sticker fees and things like that, taking off tolls. So I just think, what we do in government is create the conditions for economic prosperity. We don't, create the jobs. That's the market's going to do that. So let's have the conditions in place. And I've never seen governments tax their way to prosperity.
So it's safe to say that in future Bethlenfalvy budgets will be that same philosophy when it comes to taxation?
Yeah, absolutely. We're relentless on that. You're right. It's not just the premier that's swinging on the carbon tax. Look, the carbon tax is not really changing behaviors or reducing emissions. We got different ways to do that. Ontario has a path with our nuclear, hydro, and renewable strategy. Like, I'll put it up against anybody's in the world. We're getting it done right here in Ontario. And I just want to end on this note.
Sure.
One of the metrics I look at is how's the bond market looking at Ontario's budget and its plan? And we have now, for the first time in over a decade, the lowest borrowing costs of any province in Canada. Has been some time that any finance minister sitting in this chair has been able to say that. So the markets are telling us they like our strategy. They think we're on the right path to balance, and they think we're on the right path for building the Ontario economy and economic prosperity.
Peter Bethlenfalvy, thanks for coming on the program today.
Always a pleasure, Tony.
Thanks for watching our show today.